In order to declare that each constitution of the Synod was the new way going forward, we must presume that these were new rites, new laws, meaning that these were not the rites that were performed, accepted and enacted by the Irish people before this time. But before we explore the contrasting rites of the Irish, let us look at what the theological views of the Irish people were. We don't have much to go on in terms of volume, but what we do retain opens the doors to some very interesting leanings which the Irish may have had. It is always important for us to remember that what we've been given about these deities, Irish or Celtic deities, have come from Roman hands. So let us also remember that Rome had spent centuries attacking and destroying the Gallic or the European people, along with their gods and their druids, which were the priest class or the philosophers at the time. So naturally we must admit and assume an implicit bias in this reporting. One of the most striking elements of the Romans was their tendency toward the practical, the real, the material, and the physical world. And as centuries have proved, the ruling families which directed Roman destiny tended toward the literalization of the metaphysical or the esoteric. For it was, after all, these ruling Roman families that made the character of Christ a literal human character. And so when we have a Roman mind attempting to understand the rites, rituals, and apparent gods of the Celts, we would be doing well to suppose that there may have been a literalizing of what were metaphorical concepts. The 1st century Roman Lucan describes 3 deities, the first of which was Belai, whose name is said to have many different spellings: Bel, Belinus, Baal, or Balor. Belai, according to Nicholas Hagger, was, quote, the creator as regards the past, otherwise known as Teitates. It's important to remember that we are dealing with aspects of the creator. We're dealing here with expressions which are grounded in the same source, the many faces of God, if you will. Belai has been equated with Mars and Mercury, or the Greek Ares and Hermes. Teitates, the British version, and the Irish Tuathal Tekmar are said to be equivalents. The name Teitates means ruler of the people, with the name Belinus as being said to stem from the Indo-European tongue and meaning the shining one or the bright one. This shining or brightness could be connoted as a fire, and we see this in Ireland with Bealtaine, or the fire of Bel. We of course have others who suggest that the name supposed white or grey and coupled it with the solar aspects held by Apollo. The victims of these gods, as per Lucan, were said to be sacrificed by being plunged and drowned in a vat, possibly filled with alcohol. Now, be free to accept this as what was witnessed or heard by Lucan and as a fact. However, I will rather attempt to walk a different path and assume a higher degree of respect for my racial ancestors. So let us veer away from the literal and let us have a look at the metaphorical, where we can begin with the cauldron. You see, we run into this object many times throughout European people's mythology. And what an esteemed object it was, for it was considered one of the 4 treasures of the Tuatha Dé Danann. The cauldron was of the Dagda, and it was said that no person went away from it unsatisfied. It was known as the Cauldron of Plenty, owned by the Dagda, or the good god, who held power of life and death, magic and fertility. Let us note that a cauldron is built or made to hold liquids, the primary liquids being water and blood. So if we take the symbolic nature of this event, the drowning in the cauldron, it turns from an execution to a ritual of initiation. This naturally moves us away from a legal or criminal pursuit into a religious or psychological one. And if we are to believe and walk the path that Carl Jung walked and many others, we can see that the ancient version of psychological exploration, ritualistic magic, would have been known as magic. And in magic, the correspondences which tie water to the moon, it ties water to the feminine, and it ties water to the person, to the body, to the emotions, the watery, often restless waters of the emotional life. So let us continue imagining, remembering even maybe. After drinking from the cauldron, perhaps we meet Cernunnos, who is the horned god who mediates between man and nature. He was the god of wild places, the god of the underworld, the unexplored. We notice that the horns are of the animal is instinctual, and man has animal instincts and desires. Perhaps this rite involved us being led to the water to meet our sexual energy and our emotional waves in order for us to be able to harness the power of taming the waters within us. You see, water has many attributes. It holds our reflection, it feeds our reflection back to us, and it has also been shown to retain a certain kind of memory. So meeting the cauldron, we are perhaps intoxicated, perhaps with the ishkabaha, the spirit water, and or other psychoactive herbs and mushrooms. For both alcohol and hallucinogenic herbs and mushrooms can be said to melt our psychic defences, allowing a more suppressed and buried layer of our nature to come to life before us and within us. In such a rite we may reveal the subterranean waters to ourselves. We come face to face with our shadow, the strengths and weaknesses that we both resist and deny. This can be an intense encounter, as any who've experienced a bad trip can testify to. But many reports of those who have taken to such exotic self-examinations tell of a feeling of renewal, being different from that point on, having been changed by the experience. And this is precisely what the French Celtic historian Jean Markale postulates was the purpose of this drowning in the cauldron. For he's seen it as a ritual of rebirth or of regeneration, perhaps performed at Samhain, Halloween, the Celtic New Year, where worlds collapse into each other, the inner world and the outer world. For these are the parts of you that you hide from yourself, and the parts of you that you show to the world, the parts that you present to the world, or the parts that you want to be seen to embody. It is needless to say that this would not have been performed for mere pleasure, as it would have been a trial, a test of one's ability to steady the waters in oneself. The current study of epigenetics suggests a remembering of what was once axiomatic, that the ancestors remain living in us all. What is meant by that, of course, is that certain beliefs, traits, experiences, feelings, phobias, imaginings that our ancestors had have been shown to trickle down through the generations, and such a trial by waters may have brought one face to face with the residual elements of our ancestors. An overcoming of our previous limitations, the failings of our fathers, would meet us in such a trial, and we would have to steady those waters. We would have to steady the ship on those waters. We would have to meet them, to internalize them, to make them our own, and to let go of what was no longer useful. For this is your underworld, and I'm sure many of fragile and unworthy minds would have been taken captive and held in this realm. This was also what could be called a baptism, an initiation rite which any and all seeking positions of power and prestige would have had to go through. And go through not just for one's sake or for oneself, but for the tribe's sake and for the sake of the ancestors, whose spirit may be laid to rest by the initiate's stilling of his waters. For we see in the early Celtic Church, pre-Roman, that they did not believe in original sin, and so saw no need for a baptism of the newborns. And there was a different rite for this, with a different intention. It was a simple blessing. The Celtic Church, perhaps best recorded in the teachings of the 5th century Pelagius, emphasized total free will and responsibility of the individual. Man was naturally good and certainly not tainted by the sin of others, least of all by this original sin of Adam. Baptism was said to take away all of the sins of man, all of the sins that man had made, and so it would not have been a rite performed on babies who would have been viewed as perfectly innocent. Contrary to Catholic dogma, baptism was also not seen as necessary in order to live a good life free from sin. And so it would have been an initiation, chosen freely by a man who would devote himself to living a pure life from that moment forward. By mastering his waters, balancing his animal instincts with the light of moral choice and responsibility which emerged together with the Creator. Such a man may be said to be able to walk on his waters owing to their stillness. He may have gone on to become a sort of Celtic shaman or psychologist, perhaps even a druid or a holy man, whatever name or title was given back then. Baptism would have been given to adults, and it would have been taken by those possessing the mightiest of wills and the best of natures. And this is what the second constitution of the Synod of Cashel sought to and did take away from the Irish. We have lost the seriousness of this rite, the intention of this rite, the freely chosen participation in this rite. Where once it was taken on by men of renown, it is now given to babies so they do not burn in hell. What a mighty fall. But we may climb again. By understanding what we have lost and what has been taken from us, we can reclaim our spiritual sovereignty. Thank you.